They threw a party on my boat. Not near it, not beside it. My deck, my cushions, my dad's vintage wine, all trampled by strangers dancing like they bought tickets to a festival. They raised glasses to neighborhood unity while I stood there, invisible, watching them treat my sanctuary like a public playground. What I did next might seem extreme, but when people treat your life's work like it's theirs, you start thinking differently. I still wonder if I went too far. So, let me ask you, have you ever had to teach someone a lesson they never saw coming? Let me set the scene. My name's Ethan, 40 years old, a carpenter by trade in a small coastal town in Oregon called Bayshore Cove. Boats are my obsession, my escape. When I was 27, my grandfather left me a modest piece of waterfront property on the edge of a serene bay, a tiny 800-square-foot cabin and a private dock that felt like a gold mine. For 4 years, I poured every spare hour into building my dream boat, Seabound Star, a 30-foot beauty with a cedar deck and custom fittings. It's not the grandest vessel, but it's mine, built with sweat, love, and late nights. My dad, a wine enthusiast, helped me install a climate-controlled wine cabinet below deck when his hands were still steady. "A boat without a place for good wine isn't worth sailing," he said, measuring the space with care. He gifted me 3 bottles from his collection, vintage 1970s reds, meant for moments that matter. "These are for when life feels complete," he told me, and I believed him. That cabinet isn't just storage, it's a piece of him, preserved in my boat's heart. Life on the bay was perfect. I'd wake before dawn, coffee in hand, and watch the sunrise from Seabound Star's deck, the water glassy and quiet. My neighbors, mostly retirees, kept to themselves, offering waves or quick chats about tides or crab season. It was the life I'd always wanted, simple and untouched. But perfection never lasts, does it? Everything changed in the summer of 2024 when the old Harper place next door sold. The new owners, 2 sisters named Vivian and Claire, arrived on a misty June morning. They carried themselves like they were auditing the neighborhood, scanning the bay with sharp eyes. I watched them from my dock, and something about their posture, calculated, almost predatory, set me on edge. I told myself to give them a chance, that moving stress might explain their vibe. I should have trusted my gut. That afternoon, Vivian strode onto my dock, heels clicking like she owned the planks. "Hi, I'm Vivian, your new neighbor and chair of the Bayshore Cove Community Council," she said, her smile all teeth, no warmth. "This boat's stunning. Keeping it all to yourself feels a bit stingy, don't you think? We should talk about shared access." I nearly laughed, thinking she was joking, but her eyes were dead serious. Shared access? This was my private dock, my boat, built with my own hands. I stayed polite, explaining it was personal property, not a community asset. Her sister Claire, hovering behind, nodded like a loyal deputy. "We're all about unity here," Vivian pressed, her tone implying I was the problem. It wasn't a request, it felt like a demand. I figured they'd back off after I held firm, but I was wrong. A week later, on a foggy Saturday, I drove to town for lumber to fix my dock. The trip took 2 hours, and I was looking forward to a quiet evening tinkering on Seabound Star. But as I pulled into my driveway, music thumped from my dock loud, pulsing, wrong. My stomach dropped. I told myself it couldn't be what I thought. Maybe a neighbor's boat had drifted too close. But when I rounded the cabin, I saw it. A dozen strangers on my boat, laughing, drinking, sprawling across my deck like it was a rented venue. Plastic cups littered the railings, and a Bluetooth speaker blared. Vivian stood at the helm, playing hostess, waving a drink like she was christening a cruise. My blood boiled. I felt like someone was stomping on my soul. When Vivian saw me, she didn't flinch. She waved, grinning, and called out, "You're the star of our Unity event now." The audacity hit me like a slap. These people weren't confused. They'd been told this was fine, that I'd agreed to it. One guy was filming, calling it a community win. I wanted to storm aboard and throw them off, but their expectant stares froze me. I tried calling neighbors for backup. Nobody answered. Alone, I told them to leave, but Vivian cut me off, her smile venomous. "This is about togetherness, Ethan. Relax." I called the sheriff, hoping for clarity. The deputy who showed up treated it like a neighborly spat, not trespassing. Vivian spun a tale about fostering community, and he bought it, suggesting we sort it out like adults. When he left, Vivian's smirk grew. "You'll learn to share," she said, her voice icy. I stood on my dock, watching them dance, and felt a fire I hadn't known before. Official channels were my next step. I dug into the community council's bylaws, drafted a complaint with photos of the mess and neighbor statements. I thought I had a slam-dunk case. But the council's response was a gut punch: complaint denied. They claimed my boat fell under shared waterfront access and scolded my lack of community spirit. Vivian had them wrapped around her finger. That's when I got creative. I started acting broken, avoiding Vivian and Claire, letting my boat look neglected, scuffing the deck, leaving it unkempt. It killed me, but I needed them to think they'd won. Behind the scenes, I swapped the dock's heavy-duty rope for one that'd snap under pressure, studied tidal charts, and mapped where the current would take Seabound Star. I wasn't reckless. I planned every detail to ensure safety, but maximum impact. I let slip to a neighbor, Mrs. Ellis, that I was selling the boat due to stress. She promised to keep it quiet, which meant Vivian would hear it by sundown. Sure enough, Vivian took the bait, planning a triumph party with catering, a DJ, and 20 guests. The nerve was staggering. On the big day, July 4th, 2024, the weather was flawless, calm seas, light breeze. I watched from my window as they turned my boat into a floating gala, even popping open my dad's 1973 Cabernet, the one he'd saved for my wedding day. Vivian stood on the bow, toasting, teaching selfish neighbors, her words slicing through me. My hand trembled as I grabbed the scissors. For a moment, I hesitated. Am I crossing a line? Then I saw them spill Dad's wine, laughing, and I cut the rope. It parted cleanly, and Seabound Star drifted, silent and smooth. They didn't notice, too drunk on their victory. The tide carried them toward the Pacific Crest Marina, hosting the annual Coastal Elite Boat Expo, a playground for millionaires. When a guest finally saw the shore receding, panic erupted. Vivian screamed, "Why are we moving?" as guests scrambled. I stepped onto my dock and shouted, "You wanted shared access, enjoy the open water." Her face, realizing this was no accident, was worth every sleepless night. I recorded it all: Vivian's orders to treat the boat like it's ownerless, the wine, the chaos. The Coast Guard arrived after an hour, treating it as a low-priority rescue. Vivian's calls to lawyers went nowhere. I disabled the boat's radio for effect. On board, her control crumbled. Guests turned on her, shouting, "You said this was approved." Claire snapped, "You always drag me into your messes." Their unity shattered as fast as their party. The Coast Guard towed Seabound Star to the marina smack in the middle of the expo. Vivian's group, sunburned and disheveled, climbed off my boat onto a dock lined with megayachts, greeted by horrified elites and a $600 per person docking fee. Photos of their arrival went viral, captioned, "When Karens crashed the yacht club." The sisters faced $4,000 in fines, fees, and bans from every major marina on the coast. Vivian's complaint against me claiming attempted endangerment fell apart when I showed my evidence. Timestamps, recordings, proof I tried every legal route. My lawyer called it airtight. The community turned on the sisters, sharing stories of their overreach. They resigned from the council, moved away by winter, and Bayshore Cove found new leadership that respected boundaries. Here's the kicker. I'd calculated the drift to land them at that marina, knowing they'd face astronomical fees and public shame. The ocean didn't just teach them a lesson. It delivered them to karma's doorstep. Now, I sit on Seabound Star, watching the sunset, my peace restored. Sometimes, you don't fight fire with fire, you let the tide carry nonsense where it belongs. Was I too harsh, letting them drift to face their reckoning? Should I have stopped at legal complaints? Or was this poetic justice worth it? Could you have stayed calm with strangers stealing your legacy? Drop a comment, hit that like button, and subscribe if you've ever wanted to see entitlement get what's coming. What would you have done?